What's up, guys? This is Pete, and welcome back to the Carrot Poker Podcast. This is episode number 50-something, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about how to review a hand history. I have a hand here that's been posted on my corner pretty damn recently. I think it was like a few minutes ago. So this is probably like the fastest I've ever jumped on a hand to make a podcast hand review. So this hand is played at 5NL6 Max by one of my aspiring students. And the hand doesn't really have a title, but I'll just get right into it and we'll just review this hand right here. So, student writes, I'd only played 13 hands with villain so far, but they were running 25-8 and had already limped into the pot a couple of times, so probably not a huge whale, but still timid and passive. Yeah, I mean, I'd right away just use the the label of fish to describe a player who's limped into the pot twice and is running 25-8. This is the kind of fish against whom you should definitely expect a fair degree of fold equity. So you should expect that when you isolate their limps and things like that, that they're going to be check folding a lot of flops. You may even be able to barrel like more scare cards and more semi bluffs than you would normally against the average fish. So this is the kind of fish that you bluff more than you do like a 55-38 drooler. So pre-flop, hero gets king 10 of spades dealt to him in the small blind, and under the gun, who's the player in question, limps into the pot for 5 cents. Hero isolates to 25 cents, and under the gun calls, so we go 2-8 to the flop. So pre-flop seems pretty standard to me. Hero writes, villain limps under the gun, and it folds round to me in the small blind with king 10 of spades, so I raise it up. Nothing controversial here, I don't think. Big blind folds, under the gun calls. Yep, absolutely agree. I think 5x is the better sizing. You are out of position. So there's two things here. One is that you've only got one player to act after you. So the chance of getting 3-bet by someone and losing like the 5 big blind open or ISO that you make here is significantly reduced. And the second thing is that by going 5x, you make it less likely that the big blind will come along and you avoid the 3-bet pot, which is more the 3-way pot, which is much more important to do when you're out of position. Being out of position, you would much rather be heads up rather than have to play multi-way out of position, which is not great. Obviously, you can deal with it a bit more if you're in position on the button or whatnot. But having to play 3 ways here out of position is not what you want. So going a little bit bigger just to get that fish to yourself with a higher frequency is definitely advisable. So heroes played pre-flop here certainly very well. Flop comes down 9-8-3. 9 of diamonds, 8 of diamonds, 3 of spades. So hero has king 10 of spades. So heroes flop the backdoor flush draw. And hero leads c-bets for 35 into 55 and under the gun calls. Again, I think pretty standard. Like we already said in our analysis that this is the kind of fish that we want to have a wider c-bet range against, even if we're out of position here, which obviously does render less high EV like our c-betting strategy. It's still going to be good when we've got like some backdoor draws here like we do here to go ahead and make a c-bet against the more timid variety of fish who should play quite fit or fold. And we'll even do things like call jack 10 and then not bluff the river when turn checks through. Like he'll let us showdown king high and win against his worst draws and stuff like that. So against a player like that, you definitely want to be c-betting the flop even though you are out of position here. Hero writes, I decide to c-bet here, which I'm not overly thrilled about on this board as I don't think we have much fold equity on the flop. Kind of disagree with that. Like there are, like of course it's quite easy to connect with a flop like 9-8-3 two-tone. Like the fish can connect here with quite a lot of his limping range, but he's still going to have hands that are going to fold now or fold later, such as like small pocket pairs, medium pocket pairs, ace high, random king high and stuff. Like a guy that's running 25-8 is probably limping hands like queen jack as well, that you're actually ahead of that are going to call here. And if he's passive again, like I said, these hands aren't even necessarily going to try and win the pot from you. So there's definitely a good incentive, I think, to go ahead and c-bet here. I don't think it's making you a load of money. I agree it's not as clear cut as it might be in a spot where we're in position with like a drier texture to work with, but it should still be comfortably plus EV to make a c-bet here. Turn rolls off as the 4 of spades. So, let me just finish Hero's thinking about the flop because he said a lot more than I just read there. He says, however, after saying that he doesn't think he has much fold equity on the flop, he's added a however clause and said, I think this hand is too strong to check fold, which I think is true. I think like you do have enough fold equity here and prospects like pot equity, improvement, being able to win against queen jack, that kind of thing, getting to showdown more than you should be allowed to with king high and winning. These things are all in your favour here, so there's enough of that going that I don't think check folding is really on the cards. Check folding is probably okay because you could argue that the passive player is probably going to check back a lot of the time when he misses the flop, and then you can just lead turn and delay your c-bet. So I'm kind of torn here. I think a delayed c-bet against a passive player is also okay, and I think check folding is probably alright-ish against someone who we know is passive. The thing that puts me off doing that, taking that delayed c-bet line and check folding flop, is that we don't really have a big sample on villain yet. We've got no idea how often he is going to stab with air. So I think c-betting is like the safest route to just doing something that's clearly plus EV, even if not by a great deal. So yeah, it's close between check, folding, flop, and c-betting, I think. But I think c-betting is absolutely fine. I think it's good. He also goes on to say check calling flop isn't very appealing, given we have to fold a lot of turns if villain fires 2 streets. Well, yeah. I mean, you're lacking the essential ingredient here to check call the flop anyway, which is showdown value. Like, you have king high. You don't even have ace high. You can't even beat a bunch of semi-bluffs or bluffs that villain is going to make. You beat some of them with king high, but you beat very few of them compared to what you would beat if you had like ace king. Like, and also just don't go check calling flops against passive players. It's not going to be a good idea because they don't stab as a bluff or semi-bluff anywhere near as much as they should. They're more inclined to take free cards all over the place, and obviously if they're taking a lot of free cards by checking with weaker hands, their betting range is naturally going to be stronger. And against a passive fish, you want to be the one betting, because at least that way villain puts money in with like some worse hands as well, or some weaker hands that are going to fold at some point. When we check, I think we have like no fold equity ever going forward, and we're typically in very, very bad shape if we call. So definitely check calling is out of the equation, I agree. He goes on to say that if villain calls a flop bet, then there are a bunch of draws and weak pairs that we can make him fold later on. That's true. I would look for a scare card or a card that you pick up equity on in order to do that. Like, I wouldn't just barrel against a passive fish who could be stationary with a pair like on like the 5 of hearts turn. But on that 4 of spades turn where we pick up equity, like, I'm definitely going to advocate a bet in a little minute for as a bluff, semi-bluff rather. So definitely think that that plan of, you know, making villain fold some under pairs to the board, which are going to be a significant part of the range that limp calls pre-flop. There's definitely going to be an abundance of hands like deuces through to 7s that will maybe call flop fold turn. So that's definitely why I like betting when we improve equity, or when the turn is like good for us, like a jack, a queen, or an ace. A king would be a value bet, obviously, but like a jack, an ace, these hands are scare cards that improve our equity as well. Well, at least the jack does. The ace just probably causes them to fold every under pair and maybe even some 8x and stuff like that. And obviously when we make a draw, like, our bluff needs to work less often, and so bluffing is going to become like more profitable even if fold equity doesn't necessarily go up greatly on that card. So he goes on to say that Hero goes on to say that we can also turn equity with any spade, 7 or jack, as well as make a pair that would put us ahead if villain has a made hand. I fire a slightly more than half pot c-bet and get a call. So onto the turn, which is the 4 of spades, giving us a flush draw. Here, Hero says, turn is the 4 of spades, which doesn't improve villain's range. This is very articulately written and very like detailed, by the way, so this is the way to kind of provide hand analysis on your own hands. Like, definitely have like a kind of monologue going on there, where you're just describing everything that happened, like you're telling a story. It puts things in perspective, it makes sure you're clear about the details of the hand and everyone else's as well, and it provides all your thoughts like face up on a plate for people to pick apart and basically see what you're doing wrong with your thought process. So that's definitely very important what Hero's doing here. So he says, I feel like villain's turn call. So first he says, the 4 of spades, which doesn't improve villain's range and gives me the second nut flush draw, so I think it's reasonable to fire again here. Again, slightly more than half pot, and so that's what Hero does. He bets on the turn 70 into a pot of 125, which I like. I think this is definitely good. Goes on to say on the turn that, where are we? He goes on to say that villain calls again. I feel like villain's turn call caps his range somewhat. Yeah, maybe. I mean, 2 pair or a set should want to raise on this wet board, so I feel like his range consists mainly of weak 1 pair hands and draws, whereas I have all the over pairs. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of going into thinking about range versus range there, which is not like super important against a random fish. Like, how does that really help us to think that we have over pairs and sets and things like that and he doesn't have them so much? I don't think it really matters. It might mean that we do have fold equity, but generally the fish is not thinking too much about your range. He's not being like, well, villain has this range advantage that I can't have, blah, blah, blah. He's more just thinking about his hand and playing his hand. But even with that being the case, I definitely agree that Hero's right here, that 2 pair or a set is definitely less likely, as it should be like going for the check raise on the flop sometimes, or check raise on the turn. But passive players will sometimes slow play those hands, so instead of eliminating them completely from villain's range, it would be more prudent to just discount them and say that they're less likely. but they're already combinatorially unlikely anyway, so they're definitely very unlikely now that he doesn't raise. I agree, he's got like a capped range here, and obviously like when villain can't have like the nutted hands as often, there must be more fold equity because he's going to have like under pairs more frequently relative to the rest of his range. But villain does call again, which is normal. Like he's going to have a lot of 9x, a lot of draws here, a lot of stuff that wants to call. And on the river we get a 7 of clubs. And I think this is a really bad card, because if villain had Jack 10 or something like that, or 8-7 or whatever, like, or 9-7, like the hand is just improved to 2 pair or a straight or whatever, so it definitely like does complete some of villain's draws. So by betting on the 7 of clubs, we would only really make villain fold out, I don't know, maybe one hand, some hand like ace-8 or something like that, maybe like a nut flush spade draw, but there's not that many of them that don't have pairs, because we wouldn't really expect, like we have the 10 and the king of spades for a start, so villain can't have those, and I wouldn't expect him to have ace queen or ace jack of spades too often, because those would be raised pre-flop instead of limped a lot of the time. So like actual better flush draws that villain can have here, there are hardly any of them. Villain's range is much more weighted towards like your jack 10s and your 9-8s and your, maybe not 9-8, but like 10-9, 10-8, that kind of thing. Is the stationary fish going to fold those on the river? Not as often as we would hope. Like, okay, we don't know he's a stationary fish, and I did say earlier that we would bluff this guy more than we would bluff other players who are fish, but we need to be somewhat careful here still, because villain is still a fish, and fish don't really like to fold one pair when the flush draw doesn't get there. That's just a kind of mantra of poker. Like, it's not going to be very easy to make villain fold those hands, and if we are going to make him fold those hands, we'd have to bet big here. So I don't really like Hero's river line here, where he bets 125 into 265. It's like less than half pot. What are you really expecting villain to fold out for that sizing? Like, there's almost nothing. I don't even need a bluffing range here, because I'm against a random fish, and I just don't expect a lot of fold equity on what is pretty much, as far as villain's concerned, probably a blank. Like, it didn't complete the obvious flush draw. Yes, Jack 10 got there, but villain can certainly have all 16 combos of Jack 10 offsuit and suited. So it seems to me like Hero just doesn't have any fold equity with this sizing at all. I don't think the sizing is a good idea, and I don't think bluffing the river in general is a good idea either. So I think that Hero should just check fold at this point. He's made a profitable c-bet. He's bet the turn profitably with fold equity. Might bet turn a little bigger than 70 into 125, but it's not a big deal. And then on the river, like, we get a fairly brickish card that's unlikely to improve our fold equity, but is likely to cause villain to have made a better hand, like, some of the time. And so this can't be a good river bluffing spot, essentially. Hero says on the river, we brick out with the 7 of clubs and have to decide whether to bluff. The 7 only completes one of villain's draws, namely Jack 10, and we block that. But we're thinking too much in terms of trying to block villain's value hands. Like, if villain was a reg, this would be really important, because we do expect a reg to fold like a 9 or an 8 here sometimes. But I expect a fish not to do that very often, so I think we need to give a bit more thought to the initial player type of villain and not expect him to fold that frequently here. He goes on to say, most of his range, weak pairs and ace-x of diamonds beats us, but there's not that much ace-x of diamonds. Again, you need to think about how many combos of that flush draw there really are here. Like, villain's not going to have ace-queen, ace-king, ace-jack of diamonds, most likely. Or spades, the backdoor draw. But yeah, okay, there are some raggedy diamond draws, like ace-7 of diamonds, ace-6 of diamonds, ace-5 of diamonds in his range, sure. But they are just not very likely combinatorially here, so I don't think it's worth targeting them. Like, you could bet small just to target those if they were a bigger part of his range, but I just don't think they are a big part of his range. Like, you've got king high flush draw. If you had like a 4 high flush draw, there'd be a lot more incentive, or 6 high flush draw, I guess there's a 4 on the board here, but there'd be a lot more incentive to actually bet to fold out better draws like king high and queen high draws. But when we beat those or block them anyway, like, you know, we're not really folding out that many better miss draws here, so I don't think betting to target those is great. Hero goes on to say, if we check and he decides to bluff any of his non-nut flush draws then that have 0 showdown value, we could get bluffed off the best hand. Again, like, how many flush draws are there that aren't nut flush draws? There aren't very many of them that don't have some kind of pair here, so I think that's kind of like monsters under the bed. Those hands almost don't exist. Like, there's so few of them. Like, queen jack is about the only one I can even think of that's going to appear anything close to often, so I don't think that's too much of a worry here. So given his cat range, and I think it's a good spot to bluff as we block the nut part of his range, and his made hands are all fairly weak compared to the range we get to this river with. Yes, they are, but like, again, you're comparing the fish's hands to your range like the fish is a thinking player. like you're giving this fish far too much credit for being able to think about what your range actually is. Whereas he's more likely just to go, flush draw bricked, I have a 9, I call. I don't think that applying pressure here is really a great idea, to be honest. So I wouldn't bluff river. Personally, I don't think it's a great idea. But we'll see what the other members of the Carrot Corner forum have to say on this hand and see what feedback he gets from other sources. But what I generally do is post the link to the podcast under the thread. If you want to join Carrot Corner, you can do for a one-off fee. Just get in touch with me. Send me an email. It's not expensive. We can let you into the corner and you can get like your hands reviewed on podcasts. You can get feedback from me and my mods on posts that you make and from other members of the corner, arrange sweats, work with people. It's a very good place, a positive place where everyone's got a good attitude. So I definitely recommend checking that out. If you do sign up for coaching with me, I'm getting pretty damn busy at the moment, I have to say, but I do have a little bit of room just now for some more students. So if you get in touch quickly, I can still probably take you on for the next couple of weeks before I have to reassess. But obviously, if you do get coaching with me by emailing me at admin@carrotcorner.com, that's my email address, admin@carrotcorner.com, you can get into the forum anyway. So that's the end of the shameless promotion. Hope you enjoyed this week's hand history review, and I'll be back next week with hopefully an interview with a student or something like that. I'd like to mix things up next week, so I'm going to look into that and try and do something a bit different, because I've done like 12 episodes back to back of Hands from the Corner, which are definitely instructive and educational, but it's also good to switch to other formats too and get a guest on the show and make it a little bit more interactive rather than me just ranting for 15-20 minutes straight. So hope you're enjoying the podcast. Continue to leave me your feedback by emailing me at that same address. It's really useful. And thanks to everyone that's got in touch so far about the book, about the podcast, about coaching, about whatever. I really appreciate it, and I love to hear from you guys, so keep it up and see you on the next one. Thanks very much for listening. Bye for now.